Namaste. We will now continue with the introduction to the Bhagavad Gītā. And the next topic I would like to discuss is mental restraint as the focus of the various yoga systems. This is the central component of the various yoga systems. It's very important to understand. Mental restraint. Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. The heart of yoga is controlling the fluctuations of the mind. The various yoga systems all aspire to transfer the practitioner from the state of worldly existence into enlightened and liberated state. The practice focuses on the mind, which in the unrestrained state binds the soul to embodiment, while in the restrained and transparent state binds the soul, it leads the soul to liberation. The mind unites the physical body, the senses, and the soul, and is considered to have an immense capability of leading the soul towards enlightenment. However, being unrestrained, disturbed, and obscured due to its close relation with the senses and the various worldly desires aroused by them, it fails to realize its potential. The yoga systems therefore aspire to restrain and clean the mind, just like one cleans a mirror or lens for the purpose of seeing clearly. In its obscure state, the mind is disturbed by the working of nature, represented by the three gunas, by agitation, aroused by attraction, repulsion, aroused by sense objects, by misconceptions of the self and various memories, and by the urge of self-preservation and the fear of death. A clear consciousness may be compared to clear and peaceful lake, which is transparent, and as such, its bottom may be viewed, while an obscure consciousness may be compared to a stormy lake or muddy water, which is naturally non-transparent and its bottom unseen. The two core principles of the yoga system are practice and detachment, abhyasa and vairagya. While practice aims at the gradual restraint of a turbulent mind, detachment aims at disconnecting the mind from the various sense objects to which it is attached. Chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita is engaged with this topic and advises the practitioner of yoga, casting aside all desires arising from worldly intentions, he should subdue completely the combined senses through the mind. Little by little should he bring his mind to rest, while firmly controlling his consciousness. He should fix his mind on the self, contemplating nothing else. From whatever and wherever the flickering and unsteady mind wanders, it is to be restrained and led back into the control of the self. Yato yato nischarati manas chanchalam astiram tatas tato niyam yetad atmani evam vasham nayat. The yoga system is not merely theoretical, rather it furthers a psychophysic practice. The classical text Yoga Sutra, traditionally attributed to Patanjali, articulates an 8-stage ladder-like structure, which in a sense serves as an archetype for the yoga system. The 8 stages commence with practices which may be considered ethical and culminate with the stage of samadhi, a liberated state of ecstasy or enlightenment. The first stage is called yama, or restraint, and it includes the practice of non-violence, adherence to truthfulness, non-stealing, the practice of brahmacharya, which includes sexual subsistence, and non-accumulation. This is, of course, ahimsa, and then satya, asteya, brahmacharya, and aparigraha. The second stage is niyama, and it is comprised of cleanness, of purity, satisfaction, austerity, self-study, and scriptural study, and devotion to the Supreme. This is shocha, santosha, tapas, svadhyaya, and ishvara pranidhanam. The third stage, asana, includes an elaborate practice of bodily postures, and this is followed by the pranayama, the stage of breath control. Following that, one practices pratyahara, or the withdrawal of the senses from their objects. And this is followed by dharana, or concentration, in which one strives to maintain the sense of sense withdrawal over an extended period of time. The seventh stage is that of dhyana, and its essence is meditation on the Supreme, while the peak of the system is the eighth stage called samadhi, in which the yogi enters a state of an introspective enlightenment beyond worldly existence. This state is described in chapter 6, when the consciousness rests peacefully, restrained by practice of yoga. Then can the self see itself directly and thus be satisfied within the self itself. At that time, he knows infinite bliss experienced by an internal consciousness beyond the senses. Firmly established, he deviates not from the truth. Having attained this, he holds no other acquisition greater, and thus situated, even grievous misery does not shake him. Let it be known that the solution of the deep union with misery is called yoga, and it should be practiced with wholehearted determination. So now we will discuss the gunas, which is a very important and central concept, a Sankhya concept in the Bhagavad Gītā. So we'll discuss how human nature is comprised of the three gunas. The theory underlying the Yoga and Sankhya schools considered nature to consist of three qualities or strands called gunas. The three qualities are named sattva, representing goodness and transparency, rajas, representing passion and desire, and tamas, representing ignorance, indolence, and darkness. The three gunas comprise human nature, and they bind the soul to mind and matter, or to the subtle and gross bodies. As opposed to the soul, which remains steady and unchanging, the gunas constantly interact among themselves and unite in various combinations. As such, sometimes goodness prevails, sometimes passion, and sometimes darkness. As the gunas are so dominant and govern every aspect of life, this world is sometimes called the world of the gunas. As the three gunas comprise human nature, they are reflected through each and every thought, word, or deed. As such, the way one thinks, speaks, and acts reflects the combination of the conditioning gunas. This concept offers a unique division of human and even non-human existence, which groups together various aspects of life, such as various psychological components, activity, and adherence to duty, social grouping, eating habits, and cosmological divisions. The guna of goodness is characterized by knowledge and happiness, and adherence to duty for the sake of duty. It represents the intellectual social group or the Brahmins. It associates with fresh vegetarian food and cosmologically leads to the higher planets. The guna of passion is characterized by desire and attachment, and with adherence to duty for the sake of its fruits or for some ulterior gain. When mixed with larger amount of goodness, it represents the ruling class, and when mixed with a somewhat lesser amount of goodness, it represents the mercantile and farming class. It is associated with vegetarian food, which agitates the senses, such as spicy or salty food, and cosmologically it leads to the middle planets. The guna of ignorance is characterized by darkness, indolence, and madness, and it involves the negligence of duty. It is more dominant among the productive social class. It is associated with non-vegetarian food and intoxicating drinks, and cosmologically, it leads to the lower planets. The gunas may also be thought of as universal paths on which the soul travels during a journey through samsara. The path of goodness seems at first to be somewhat pale, but as one adheres to it, one gradually begins to experience happiness, stability, and illumination. The path of passion is contrary in that it seems very attractive and exciting at first, but as one adheres to it, one begins to experience distress and exhaustion. The lowest path, that of darkness, represents the lowest human condition. It is characterized by indolence, foolishness, and even madness, and leads to self-destruction. It is characterized. Despite the possibility of rationalizing these three paths, it may be rather difficult for the embodied to escape the influence or even bondage of the particular gunas binding him or her. For the Bhagavad Gītā, the idea of the gunas is fundamental, and elaborate discussions on the nature of the gunas take place, especially in chapters 14 17 and 18. The Bhagavad Gītā suggests a gradual elevation by which one raises oneself from a lower guna to a higher one. For this purpose, various characteristics of the gunas bondage are delineated, and these enable a process of self-examination or self-study. Consequently, one is able to change one's habits for the purpose of raising oneself in this ladder of the gunas. This idea of the gunas is firmly tied with the ladder-like structure of the Bhagavad Gītā. As such, being established in the guna of goodness, one finds oneself adhering to dharma. In other words, when one adheres to dharma, being motivated by some ulterior motives, one is considered to be governed by the two lower gunas. But when one is able to rise to the guna of goodness, one practices following dharma for its own sake, in a disinterested manner, with no desire for its fruits. This is the highest position one may reach within what we call the first story, and hence one continues to progress towards the second story, towards a position beyond the gunas. Now, we will discuss action and beyond, and specifically the principle of karma. The yogic Upanishadic point of view, which underlies the second story, is somewhat complex in its perception of human action. As the soul is considered eternal, as the gunas act and influence the soul beyond this life, similarly, the concept of action is taken to have implications beyond the present life, having its roots in previous lives and its consequences in future lives. In essence, every action is considered to bear not only immediate consequences, but long-term ones as well. As such, one may give charity to the needy and as a result be born in one's next life to a rich family, consequently living an opulent life. Alternatively, one may commit some evil and as a result be born in a poor family and consequently live in difficult conditions. This may also reinforce the vision of the gunas as universal paths. A person influenced by the guna of goodness gives charity, and this elevates him in his next life to a pious environment where he is well educated and as such continues to do good for others and be subsequently further elevated. Alternatively, a person influenced by the lower gunas causes distress to others and is consequently born in lower conditions or bodies where a bad nature is enforced upon him and drags him further down in the existential route. Although no doubt this concept may suggest the loss of free will, and in a somewhat fatalistic worldview, the Bhagavad Gītā firmly propounds the idea of free will, and underlying the entire conversation is the understanding that Arjuna can choose his own way or path. In other words, this suggests that despite the seeming fatalism sentenced by the gunas, one still has a fair amount of free will and is able to change one's life course and existence. Chapter 4 deals extensively with the subject matter of action and states, what is action? What is inaction? Even the wise are confused in this matter. Now I shall explain to you this subject matter of action. Having known this, you shall be free from evil. One must know what action, karma, is. One must know what improper action, vikarma, is. And one must know what inaction, akarma, is. As profound indeed is the course of action. Proper action is performed in accordance with one's duty or dharma and bears good results, whereas improper action is contrary to one's dharmic duties, and this bears distressing results. Seen from this point of view, both good and bad acts ultimately bind one to continuous existence, as one will have to be born again in order to enjoy or suffer the results of all the fruits of his or her actions. Alternatively, one is encouraged to perform a clean or pure action, which is considered to be inaction. The reason is that when this is done in the appropriate way, i.e., without regard to the fruits accompanied by knowledge, and it's an offering to the Supreme, it does not bear consequential fruits in future lives. Rather, it leads to liberation. As such, it doesn't have the normal binding characteristics of action. This is the highest mode of action proposed at the end of the Bhagavad Gītā, in a statement which is sometimes considered to be the text culmination and peak. Abandon all sorts of dharmas and take refuge in me alone. And I shall release you from all evils. Do not fear. Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam vraja. Aham tvam sarva papabhyo mokshaishyami masucharam. This raises a question in regards to the relinquishment of duty or external abstention from action. It seems that this is taken as a sort of improper action, and as such is liable to bear a bad result. The Bhagavad Gita emphasizes the path of karma yoga, which is the yoga of action. Accordingly, one undergoes the same yogic transformation through the performance of action, or more specifically, action according to dharma. As such, one examines one's own mode of action and constantly endeavors to sublimate it. In this way, by adhering to one's duty, by constantly sublimating it, and by refining one's inner motivations, one attains the enlightenment through action. Arjuna is presented with various motivations for performing his duty and fighting. He may fight out of some utilitarian purpose. He may fight for the sake of duty. His fighting may be taken as a practice of yoga, and he may fight out of devotion to the Supreme. So now, let's look into the Bhagavad Gita's educational doctrine. What is the Bhagavad Gita trying to educate in terms of educational doctrine? Having surveyed the two armies about to fight, Arjuna becomes despondent in his attempt to resolve a seemingly impossible moral dilemma facing him. At that time, he turns to Krishna, his friend and charioteer. In a new way, he approaches Krishna as a student approaches his guru, teacher, or master, and declares, I am now your disciple, and I fall at your feet. Please instruct me. Shishyasteham shadimam tvam prapanam. The guru teaches his student through personal tutorship, while the student not only learns from the guru theoretical knowledge, but also serves as guru and aspires to please him. Chapter 4 refers to the guru-disciple relationship by saying, know this by falling at the feet of the master, asking him questions and offering him service. In so doing, men of wisdom and vision of the truth will impart knowledge unto you. This no doubt seems to be a very personal mode of knowledge transmission, and it entails character building and a transfer of values. The structure of the Bhagavad Gita is composed not only of 3 tiers of reality, rather its other major component is a transformational ladder. The training process offered by the Guru aspires to further a moral and spiritual transformation and a gradual elevation along this ladder of values. The Bhagavad Gita begins with the lowest stage of the ladder, represented by Arjuna's lamentation, which appears in chapter 1. It follows a gradual ascendance through the entire text, and this ascendance reaches its peak at the end of the last chapter, where Arjuna surrenders himself entirely to Krishna. The question may be raised, what is considered to represent proper knowledge according to the Bhagavad Gita, or what is that the Guru teaches? Also, are the various components of knowledge organized according to the 3 stories too? Chapter 16 offers a list of the divine qualities and opposes this with the demonic ones. Now I'm quoting from the 16th chapter. Fearlessness, purification of one's whole being, firmness in spiritual knowledge, generosity, self-control and sacrifice, studying the Veda, austerity, righteousness, non-violence, truthfulness, absence of anger, renunciation, tranquility, avoiding vilification, compassion for all beings, absence of greed, gentleness, modesty, reliability, vigor, tolerance, fortitude, purity, absence of envy and pride. These are the qualities of one born to divine destiny, O Bharat. Hypocrisy, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance. These are the qualities of one who is born to demonic destiny. End quote. From analyzing this list, it seems that these represent what we may call first-story educational ideals. In other words, these are ideal qualities to be pursued while living in accordance with dharma, and their counterparts, the demonic qualities, are to be avoided. Chapter 13 offers a somewhat similar list of qualities which represents knowledge. Now I'm reading from chapter 13. Absence of pride and arrogance, non-violence, forbearance, honesty, attendance upon the guru, purity, firmness, self-control, lack of attraction to sense objects, absence of ego notion, visioning the distress and evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, aloofness from sons, wife, home, and the like, constant equanimity toward desired and undesired events, single-minded devotion to me supported by yoga, preferring of solitary places and avoiding the crowds, constant contemplation of knowledge of the self, envisioning the purpose of knowledge concerned with truth. All these are declared knowledge, whereas all else is ignorance. This list seems to be aiming at a somewhat higher position along the ladder and may be more compatible with the second and yogic story. It is more introspective, emphasizing yoga, detachment, absence of ego, and the vision of equality. Although it is not as explicit as these two lists, one may find the following verse to supply values which may be considered third story ideal qualities. Now, I quote from the 10th chapter. Those whose consciousness is absorbed in me, for whom I am everything, enlightening one another about me, constantly speaking of me, thus absorbed, they are delighted and content. This is a description of devotees immersed in the Supreme. They are entirely absorbed in the Supreme, they have no other object of interest, and they not only enlighten each other about the Supreme, but take great pleasure in doing so. It may well be that implicit in this statement is the idea that the stage of being deeply immersed in the Supreme represents not only the highest devotion, but also the highest degree of knowledge. So now we come to bhakti or devotion, is perhaps a central teaching or innovation of the Bhagavad Gita. So let's discuss bhakti. Bhakti or devotion is one of the Bhagavad Gita's major components. It represents a loving attitude toward the Supreme, was generally thought of in the context of bhakti in personal terms. Looking deeper into the emotional state characterizing bhakti, one may discern love, devotion, a desire to please the Supreme Person, a sense of dependence upon him, a desire to glorify him and share this glorification with other devoted persons or bhaktas, a desire to serve the Supreme Lord through one's profession, a sense of loyalty to him, a desire to worship him, and a desire to please him by offering various gifts such as flowers or fruits. Krishna, who according to the Bhagavad Gita is the Supreme Lord in person, and who is the object of devotion, is not indifferent to his devotee, rather is very affectionate and protective towards him or her. As opposed to the general masculine voice dominating the Bhagavad Gita, when it comes to devotion, the text specifically refers to female devotees, a declaration which could be taken as groundbreaking for its time. Those who take refuge in me, be they of lowly origin, women, merchants, and even servants, even they may attain the highest destination. Mami parta vyapashritya yepishu papa yonaya styo vaishastato shudras te piyanti paramnatim. Looking into the structure of the Bhagavad Gita, it becomes evident that bhakti serves as a major, or even the major, elevating force, which pulls, so to speak, or raises one in his transformational journey towards self-transcendence. Although there are other motivations for elevation along the transformational ladder, such as a desire to attain true knowledge, the desire to become free from the implications of karma, and a desire for yogic perfection, still bhakti is perhaps the central source of inspiration for one to leave this world altogether. The idea of bhakti first appears explicitly toward the end of chapter 3, where Krishna urges Arjuna to fight in the mood of surrender unto him. surrendering all your activities unto me with the mind fixed on the highest self, without desire and avoiding possessiveness, cast lethargy aside and fight. Arjuna's reaction follows soon after. At the beginning of chapter 4, he asked about Krishna's identity, to which Krishna answers that he is the Lord of all beings, descending to uphold Dharma. Following that, Krishna encourages Arjuna in numerous places throughout the Bhagavad Gītā and takes refuge in him, to take refuge in him in a devotional mood. In general, Krishna urges Arjuna to become his devotee in three basic ways, or rather stages, which are compatible with the three tiers of the text. On the first tier, Krishna encourages Arjuna to adhere to his work and duty according to Dharma, and offer this work and results unto him. An example of this kind of devotion is found at the end of chapter 9. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer in sacrifice, whatever you give away, and whatever austerity you may practice or kuntiya, do it as an offering unto me. Yat karot yadashnasi, yat juhosh yadasiyat, yat tapasyasi kuntayar, tat kurushva madarpanam. Underlying this attainment is the understanding that Arjuna is thinking in terms of the world of Dharma. As such, he is encouraged to maintain a sense of human individuality and to offer Krishna the fruits of his work. A higher state of bhakti is that of yogic devotion, exemplified by Krishna's conclusion in chapter 4. Therefore, Bharat, you should cut the doubt residing in your heart, which springs from nothing but ignorance. With your own sword of knowledge, resort to yoga and rise up to battle. This represents a second-story position where Arjuna is attempting to rise above his own worldly attachments, represented by the doubts residing in his heart and obstructing him from hearing Krishna clearly and following his instructions. Krishna urges him to cut his doubts, which represent ignorance, with a sword of knowledge, and doing so by resorting to yoga, a verse which seems to carry a similar import, although with a slightly more personal emphasis, may be found in chapter 8. Therefore, at all times, remember me and fight with your mind and intelligence absorbed in me. You will come to me without doubt. This verse also relates to external fighting. This verse also relates the external fighting to the internal one. The fighting here is considered to be a kind of yoga practice involving self-restraint, mental control, and an inner meditation upon Krishna. As such, it well exemplifies the two main components of the second story or the world of yoga. One, on the one hand, attempting to cut the bonds which hold one in embodied existence, and on the other hand, an attempt to connect or yoke oneself to the higher, supreme, and spiritual reality, here represented by Krishna himself. The third story, Bhakti, may be exemplified by two of the Bhagavad Gīta's concluding verses. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, and pay your homage unto me. Thus you shall undoubtedly come to me. I promise you this, as you're very dear to me. Manmana bhavavan bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuro mame vashyati satyam te prati jane priyosime. And the next one, which we have already read, abandon all dharmas and take refuge in me alone, and I shall release you from all evils. Do not fear. These two verses represent a higher and more peaceful state of devotion to Krishna. This is the state beyond both dharma and the internal yogic struggle, a state of intense but peaceful absorption in the mood of devotion, in which one always thinks of Krishna in loving devotion, and is very dear to Krishna. A more structured and condensed description of a descending ladder of devotion appears in chapter 12. Now I'm reading an ascending ladder, 12th chapter. Fix your mind on me alone and absorb your consciousness in me. Thus you shall surely abide in me. If you cannot fix your consciousness and steadily upon me, then aspire to reach me through repeated yoga practice. O Dhananjaya, if you are incapable even of that, embrace the path of action, for which I am the highest goal, since by acting for me you shall attain perfection. But if you are even unable to follow this path of refuge in me, through acts devoted to me, then give up the fruits of all your actions, thus restraining yourself. Knowledge is superior to practice. Meditation is superior to knowledge, and relinquishing the fruits of actions is higher than meditation, as tranquility soon follows such relinquishment. The latter begins with complete absorption of one's consciousness in Krishna, which is a third-tier position. The next and lower stage is direct yoga practice, and the next stage is working for Krishna and offering him the fruits of labor. Both of these stages represents a second-tier position. Lower than that is the first-tier position of relinquishing the fruits of labor. Following that comes meditation, knowledge, and practice. So now we'll discuss the vision of the Supreme, the darshana of the Supreme. The Bhagavad Gītā reaches its theological climax in chapters 7 and 9, where the vision of the third story is articulated. Having led Arjuna from the first story to the second and then to the third, Krishna at last relinquishes the various logical arguments meant to convince Arjuna to rise higher and higher along the ladder of self-transcendence, and turns to a description of the spiritual reality. Krishna speaks of his complex relationships with the spiritual souls in the world, moving between transcendence and immanence. As such, he describes two natures, the lower and the higher. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intellect, and ego. These that comprise my separated lower nature. But you should know that besides this lower nature, Almighty Angon, there is another higher nature of mine, comprised of spirit souls by which the world is sustained. Bhumira lova yu kamano buddhir evacha ahankara itiyame bina prakritir ashtada pariyamitastvadhyam bina prakritim me param jiva bhutam ha baho yedam dharyate jagat. Both of these natures are Krishna's natures, but the first, which is comprised of matter and mind, is lower and separated, whereas the second, which is comprised of spiritual souls, is higher and apparently connected or deeply related to Krishna, who himself supports the entire creation, as everything rests upon him, just like pearls which are strung on a thread. The relationships between the Supreme Person and the creation are complex, and much has been said and written in this regards by the later great Vedantin commentators, who articulated systematic theologies engaged with the dualism and the non-dualism of the world. The text continues to endow a vision. I pervade the entire world in my unmanifest form. All beings rest in me, but I do not rest in them. And yet all beings do not rest in me. See my mystic splendor. I sustain beings, but rely not on them. My very self is the cause of their being, as the great wind that goes everywhere is eternally contained within space. Know that similarly all beings are contained in me. Unquote. This description is free from argumentative language and may be difficult to articulate it within common theological categories such as transcendence, immanence, or pantheism. These statements do not seem to adhere to simple logic. As such, all beings rest in Krishna, but at the same time, all beings do not rest in him. The reason is that this description comprises a darshana or vision. This vision is not open to all. Rather, one must become a surrendered devotee of Krishna in order to overcome his deluding power and maintain such a vision. Divine indeed and difficult to penetrate is my deluding power, consisting of the three gunas. But those who have surrendered unto me alone, they can transcend it. Daivyesha gunamayi mamamaya duratyaya mam evalye prapadyante vayametam tarantite. As such, one must overcome desires and become a surrendered devotee of Krishna in order to absorb and maintain such a vision. Chapter 9 concludes with a statement which seems to represent the epitome of the entire Bhagavad Gita. And this is a call for pure devotion. All who think of me and become my devotee, worship me and pay homage unto me, thus yoke to me and intent on me as your highest goal, you shall come to me. So now we will discuss the structure of the Bhagavad Gita. I've already spoken about it. I mentioned it, but now let's look at it a little deeper. So far, we have presented the Bhagavad Gita structure in a somewhat simplistic manner. We may now examine it more carefully. The Bhagavad Gita is a rich treatise containing numerous ideas fundamental to Hinduism. However, are these ideas consistent and coherent? Seen from a theological, philosophical perspective, the Bhagavad Gita possesses a coherent and consistent theme, which could be followed from the beginning of the treatise to its end. This section aims at looking deeper into the Bhagavad Gita structure, which is founded on a three-tier concept of reality and intertwined with transformational ethical ladder. The idea of hierarchical reality suggests that reality is not unified, rather that it contains different tiers or levels. There's a higher reality as well as a lower reality, and one must distinguish between the two. Moreover, each tier has its own unique language, terms, and underlying assumptions. The ethical ladder is composed of various stages, and these enable one to rise from the lower tier of reality to the intermediate tier and then to the higher one. Each of the ladder's stages is defined by its underlying motivation. The more one undergoes transformation through sublimation of one's motives for action, the more one transcends this ethical ladder, or ascends this ethical ladder. The ethical ladder is rooted at the low stage of reality, which represents worldly life, and as one gradually rises up the ladder, one makes progress towards the state of moksha. This structure highlights the Bhagavad Gita's jnana and karma aspects. The jnana aspect is represented by the three-tier metaphysical concept, whereas the karma aspect is represented by the ladder of actions, various grades. The three metaphysical tiers and the ladder of ethical stage are complementary. The division of reality into these three tiers highlights one's presence condition in the lower tier and one's goal, which is the higher tier, whereas the ladder of action provides the practical means of gradually overcoming this gap step by step by a process of self-transformation. The Bhagavad Gita is a hierarchical reality. We discussed that. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the triple foundations of Vedanta, and as such shares qualities characterizing a Vedantin text, such as hierarchical grades of reality. In general, one can find two principal metaphysical positions in Indian philosophy: the realistic or direct position and the hierarchical position. The direct realistic position assumes that reality is unified. That is, it does not contain divisions or layers. As such, it is subject to direct human recognition and should not be submitted to different interpretations. The hierarchical position assumes that reality is not unified, rather contains differing levels or tiers. There's a higher or superior reality and a lower or inferior reality, and one must distinguish between absolute and relative reality. The two-leveled reality concept, the first empirical and conventional, and the second absolute, the first changing and finite, and the second permanent and infinite, may be treated by applying the terminology dharma and moksha. The level of dharma is representative of the human or worldly condition, while the level of moksha is representative of the real or absolute condition. Mentioning dharma, its opposite term, adharma, ought to be referred to as well. Ordinarily, dharma and adharma are considered opposite terms. However, seen from the point of view of moksha, both dharma and adharma are in an entirely different category. According to our terminology, both dharma and adharma represent the finite level, whereas moksha represents the infinite level. Simplifying terms, the embodied state representing both dharma and adharma is the world of samsara, whilst the liberate state is therefore entirely different nature called moksha. These two kinds of dichotomies between dharma and adharma, and between dharma and moksha, can be understood through a somewhat graphic description. The dichotomy between dharma and adharma may be taken out to be horizontal, as both existing within the same realm, whereas the dichotomy between both dharma and adharma and between moksha may be taken to be vertical. This is so as both dharma and adharma are situated in the worldly or finite level, whereas moksha is situated in a completely different and higher level, which is infinite and absolute. Besides the two tiers underlying the Bhagavad Gītā, which could be considered the finite and the infinite, alternatively dharma and moksha, there is a third tier, serving as an intermediate one connecting the two tiers, which would otherwise be unrelated to each other due to an insurmountable gap separating the two. The first tier represents dharma and furthers proper human life. The second tier represents yoga and furthers attempts to escape the vicious state of samsara while gradually seeking hold of the state of moksha. And the third tier represents the state of moksha itself. A question may arise: how can these tiers be studied or distinguished? I suggest that in order to distinguish the tiers from each other, their underlying assumptions in terms of values and being may be examined. Thus, in the first tier, that of dharma, the general rule in terms of values to prosper. As such, worldly happiness and prosperity are desired and are good. In terms of being, the individual is defined in this tier as a human being or any other living being, such as an animal, plant, or other. In the second tier, the value of worldly prosperity is rejected in favor of non-attachment to the world and indifference to both worldly happiness and worldly distress, along with yoking oneself to a higher reality, that of moksha. In terms of being, the individual person does not consider himself any longer a human or other being, but as an eternal spiritual soul bound by the laws of samsara. Thus, the individual's subjective identity is not anymore that of a human being, rather that of an eternal spiritual soul. In the third tier, the ideal value is the experience of Brahmananda, or the bliss of Brahman. This realization takes place within the wider context of the Supreme Person, who is the foundation underlying the immortal and imperishable Brahman. Thus, the indifference and non-attachment of the second tier are replaced by deep attachment to the Supreme Person and deep love, expressed by loving feelings towards him. As far as being is concerned, the spiritual soul of the second tier becomes not only pure existence and one with Brahman, but assumes the identity of pure servant and lover of the Supreme Person. The three tiers represents internal mental states or attitudes. Thus, one sees the world from the point of view of the first tier. One who sees the world from the point of view of the first tier is convinced that he or she is a human being, and that his or her aim is to prosper. Similarly, one who sees the world from the point of view of the second tier is convinced that he is an embodied spiritual self, and that his aim is to get released from that condition. One who resides in the third tier may realize his oneness with Brahman, sees the Supreme in person everywhere, and aspires. He sees the Supreme in person everywhere, and aspires to serve and love him. I suggest the usage of a three-story house as a metaphor, with each tier representing a story or floor, and the ethical ladder serving as a staircase. Each story or tier contains unlimited existential opportunities and paths. Moreover, the residents of each floor have their own language, terms, and underlying assumptions, which are different from those of the residents of the other stories. In a sense, the Bhagavad Gita speaks in three different languages and constantly moves between the three tiers. Once recognizing the story or tier from which the text is speaking, that section becomes intelligible and consistent with the rest of the treatise. On a more practical level, once recognizing one's ethical stage, it becomes apparent what the next stage of progress is. These distinctions may appear to be somewhat sharp, whereas in the text itself, there are connecting links between the stories or tiers. However, this could possibly compare to the study of grammar, where tables of roots and stems are articulated and discussed. Although these linguistic forms are merely theoretical or structural and do not appear in actual spoken language, they actually underlie. Similarly, the distinction between the tiers underlies the text, although in the text itself, these distinctions may not always be easy to inspect. These ideas may be better demonstrated by a textual reference. As such, the following example demonstrates how the text shifts from the first tier to the second. When Arjuna argues against fighting the war, he does so from the position of the first tier. Now Arjuna speaks. When adharma overpowers the family, its ladies become corrupt, O Krishna. And when the women become corrupt, there is miscegenation of classes. Surely, miscegenation among classes leads both to the clan's destroyers and the family itself to hell. The family ancestors fall too, deprived of their due offerings and sanctified food and water. As such, the evil deeds of the destroyers, which lead to miscegenation among classes, wipe out eternal caste and family dharma. O Janardana, we have heard that hell awaits those whose family dharma has been obliterated. Alas, resolved are we on committing a great evil. If we intend to kill our own people out of greed for royal pleasure, better had they been killed on the battlefield, unarmed and unresting, by Dhritarashtra's sons with weapons in their hands. This is Arjuna's objections in the first chapter. This passage may now be examined according to two parameters previously mentioned, values and being. As far as values are concerned, it is clear that underlying Arjuna's speech is a desire for worldly prosperity. He believes that prosperity is good and objects to the war, which would cause the decline of dharma, the rise of adharma, and the infliction of suffering upon all involved, and beyond. As far as being is concerned, Arjuna thinks of himself and others as human beings. In answering Arjuna, Krishna doesn't address his concerns directly, but raises the conversation to the second tier and says, O Dhritarashtra, the second chapter, between both arbis, Rishikesh smiled, and thus addressing the dejected Arjuna, the blessed Lord said, while speaking words of wisdom, you lament for that which is not to be grieved for. Wise are those who do not lament either for the living or the dead. Or for the dead. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor the future shall any of us cease to exist. As childhood, youth, and old age, before the soul within the body, so it comes to acquire another body. The wise one is not swayed by illusion in this matter. Heat, cold, happiness, and distress, sensual perception alone produces them all, and it is impermanent, coming and going. You should seek to endure them, O Bharat. The wise one whom these do not disturb, who thus remains even tempered in both happiness and distress, is fit for immortality, or Bull among men. This is the beginning of the second chapter. The values propounded here are utterly different. Krishna does not accept the idea that prosperity in the world is good, but calls for indifference and endurance of both worldly unhappiness and worldly distress. These are taken to be permanent and to be produced by sensual perception alone. As far as being is concerned, Krishna does not refer to the individuals present as human beings, rather refers to them as spiritual souls or selves. In a sense, Krishna doesn't directly answer Arjuna's doubts in regards to fighting, but performs a kind of a Copernican revolution by changing the conversation's underlying assumptions. Arjuna, on his part, argues that killing his relatives is bad. This is an obvious first-tier statement, which assumes that people are subject to death and that death is to be avoided as far as possible for the sake of a prosperous life. Krishna doesn't answer Arjuna's arguments, rather he shifts the conversation to a different tier or level altogether and speaks out of different assumptions. From his higher point of view, Krishna says that death doesn't exist at all. From a second tier point of view, he doesn't see human beings subjected to death, rather he sees eternal spiritual souls and as such, he doesn't see much logic in Arjuna's arguments. As far as values, Krishna challenges Arjuna's idea that worldly prosperity and happiness are good and to be desired by propounding the idea that it is indifference to both happiness and distress, which is good and to be desired. Thus, Krishna speaks here out of the second tier position. So, we have covered today quite a bit. We have discussed various components of the Bhagavad Gita, and then we have discussed the idea of hierarchical reality. We stop here and continue to discuss the Bhagavad Gita's transformation aspects in our next lecture. So, thank you very, very much.